So thanks everyone for attending tonight for the Future Proofing Financial Operations event tonight. My name is Rob Israq. I'm CMO for Tipalti, and I'll be moderating the evening. So the theme for the evening is modernization to a large extent, and you'll hear that throughout all of the different presentations tonight. When we talk about modernization, it's not just modernizing for today's business, but the business tomorrow. Can your business stay agile? Can it stay rapid? Can it be efficient? Can it be productive? And most of all, can it stay competitive in the future? And so when executives are talking about modernization, that's oftentimes the context of it, not just the business of today, but what do you have to do to be also the business of tomorrow? And so throughout the different presentations tonight, you'll hear about that in the content. When you think about the business of tomorrow and all those things we talked about, agility, efficiency, competitiveness, and the such, that actually comes back often to the back office. Because it's the back office that have to put the infrastructure in place and the process in place to enable that rapid maneuvering with those changes. And so that is actually the inspiration of how we came up with a theme for tonight. And that theme appeared to pretty much resonate nicely. I'll just list off a few of the folks in the room so you get a sense of the types of companies that are engaging with that type of topic. So just for a few, Google, Docker, Facebook, Uber, LinkedIn, Salesforce, GitHub, Twitter, GoPro, Walmart, Yelp, Lyft, StubHub, Lending Club. The list goes on. I won't list every single person, but it's clearly a pretty high-profile audience in the room. Thank you guys for joining us, and we'll talk about the agenda. So in terms of the agenda tonight, first we'll kick off with Nathan Hilt from PWC. He'll be talking about the future of tomorrow and what that means to the CFO to stick with that type of future. Secondly, there might be a PowerPoint issue here, by the way. Secondly, Chris Skinner will be joining us from The Financer. He is a fintech authority, and he'll be talking about that fintech revolution itself. And finally, Amit, our co-founder and CEO of Tipalti, he'll be presenting on where automation and technology fits into all of this. So without further ado, I'm going to kick it over to Nathan. We're going to play a quick video prior to Nathan, and then I'll introduce him, and we'll get on with the agenda.
Today, we're constantly inundated with new digital trends and emerging technologies, and it's changed the way we engage with the world around us. A world where crowdsourcing, startups, incubators, and a movement of makers are all creating new channels of innovation, and established businesses are struggling to understand. Only 33% of companies design their software for mobile first. Of the 18.5 million software developers in the world, 40% of them do it for fun and not part of their primary occupation. Of over 700 occupations studied, 45% are candidates to be replaced by robots or software or both. With PwC's deep industry understanding and context of all the emerging technologies, you'll be able to see past the chaos and identify relevant emerging tech patterns before they become trends, giving you valuable insight and perspective to keep you in step with the ever-increasing rate of change.
While Nathan comes up stage, I'm going to give a little bit of an intro on Nathan and what he'll be talking about. So Nathan's background obviously is at PwC. He runs their financial services arm, which their practice includes payment ecosystem, strategy, product, mergers and acquisitions, security, control, and compliance. Prior to PwC, he was at Visa for 10 years, and similarly impressive resume, global product, brand, and operations. For 20 years, he's been in the electronic payment space, operations, regulations, and product requirements. So he knows what he's talking about this space. And why don't you come up stage and kick off the presentation?
Okay, awesome. I will start out by saying that I am not the head of financial services for PwC, although that sounds very impressive. But I do work within our financial services group, and really my background is in and around payments. So I was a little bit nervous actually putting the material together because it's kind of the things that I do every day, but not everybody enjoys payments and moving money around. But then talking with people before the presentation, I feel like this is the exact audience that they would find this content applicable. So I'm going to talk to you about sort of what are the things that are shaping payments today. And this is not the future of payments, but it's more of things that are happening today. So again, if you're in the world of payments, these things are going to be pretty standard, mundane. But if you are not, if you are really focused on finance and the CFO from a classic sense, then some of these things are areas that you typically would not have been involved with, right? Especially things like fraud, security, et cetera. Those things typically don't mix with finance, but now we're seeing that the world of payments, all these things are blending together. So really the story today, other than just going through the 5 points, is the pace of change. So that was the purpose of the video. It wasn't to promote PwC, but really is to show that the pace of change has increased. Again, being in Silicon Valley, you sort of take that for granted. The companies that Rob listed off there, they're the who's who of change and pace. But I think some of the statistics around development, mobile first, and the third one was around how they actually drive the change. Those things are not everyday occurrences when you get outside of Silicon Valley. So what we really want to do is to make sure that we understand the pace of change. We make sure that we understand that the CFO is going to be more involved with these things, and that's going to drive who you partner with, how your processes change, what it is that you're focused on, because all of that is being driven by this pace of change. So with that said, we'll go through a few of the trends, and then I'll spend some time on each one of them. But as an overview, right, digitization, automation, including robotics, again, this is something that is taking place. It is happening. You read about it every day. So you kind of think through, how does that affect a CFO? Well, it's really digitizing and automating those back office functions, right? Globalization, again, globalization is not new, but what we're finding and seeing in the marketplace is that globalization is taking place at a lower level, right? So if you're a large enterprise, a large tech company, a large retailer, or financial services entity, you take for granted that they're global. What we're finding is that very small players now have global operations, right? By selling things out on the internet, you have a global audience. You may get your manufacturing or your supply chain may be global. So even at a very small level, you can be a small business, but you're already global. So you're taking advantage of all of those things to grow your business, but then you're going to be subject to the regulatory requirements, tax requirements, et cetera, that small businesses typically didn't deal with. As far as faster payments, again, in the world of payments, this is something that you're hearing about a lot in the US. It's even getting to where there's a concept of real-time payments, but faster payments is coming to the US, right? The financial systems, the Fed is driving faster payments where there's multiple settlement cycles. So you think about traditional, these have been batch systems. These have been things that have been around for 30, 40 years. All of that infrastructure and the timing of it is changing, and that's going to change the role of how the CFO deals with payments to their suppliers and how they manage cash flow. The increased risk of fraud, this is something, again, you can't read the paper without hearing about someone that's been breached, that there's fraud, there's exposure, the risk tolerance are being exceeded. So these are things, again, that you're reading about every day, but you have to deal with them in a way that you maybe didn't in the past. And the CFO has to be a part of that conversation where it's not something that sits with the risk group, that sits with the security group. Really, finance has to be involved from the start. And then the last is mergers and acquisition. So this has been something where finance has traditionally been involved with the idea of the due diligence and setting up the targets for synergies, et cetera. But the pace of M&A, and then also the fact that it's not just being used for growth, but it's being used to buy disruptors that may otherwise have disrupted your business. Now you're trying to incorporate that within your business. So it's changing what the acquisitions are doing and then how you manage finance, because some of these things, again, were disruptive and now you're trying to integrate them. So these are the 5 topics. I'll go through them one by one, give some details. And again, the concept is that it's the pace of change and how finance needs to be more integrated as they deal with them. So the first one around digitization, automation, really the key thing here is this concept of a digital native, right? So you have sort of these 3 groups of people. Could be a demographic, could be buying behavior, it could be socioeconomic, that there's a traditional consumer of goods, there's a traditional player that has adopted some of the technology and have moved to digital, but that's a declining entity. Then you have those like myself, where I would consider myself a digital convert, right? So I started sort of in the analog world, but I moved into where pretty much everything that I do is digital, whether it be work, whether it be how I interact, it's all on a digital platform. And then you have the digital native, which are the millennials, people like my children, that they don't understand the world without digital. So I give the example, like my kids have no idea about consuming information that shows on a screen, that when I was a kid there was a certain time and a certain day and you sat down and you did something and you watched a piece of media. They have no concept of that. It's on demand, it's something that they can anticipate. If they can't see it today, they find it, they see it tomorrow. It's a consumption model. That is their experience, that is their world. They don't understand it any other way. And I think the other piece is here around the customer expectations, right? That they somewhat feel incomplete without technology. I'm sure we've all read the studies where they talk to people about if they left something at home, what would make them drive back. And it's like, oh, keys, wallet, but my phone, I'm definitely driving back for that. And so you realize that you sort of feel incomplete or naked without having the technology. And they also are comfortable with the idea of that the technology is somewhat addictive, right? This gamification of things, driving that to different usage, and even again, things that are kind of mundane like saving, this is something that they're willing to do because it's been gamified and it's something that they see as part of their life. Some of the examples of how this is affected, right? We already listed off Uber and Airbnb, but again, outside Silicon Valley, you take for granted that integrated experience that they've created. And it's not just an integrated experience with payments, it's also something that they've integrated in their own internal processes. So the idea that payments are seamless, that it is digital only, it's automated, these are the companies that are doing that. And then we had example as well, US Bank, as they rolled out to focus on their small businesses, the application that they built, and then also they had the AP Optimizer, which is a project they did with Sage and MasterCard to be able to help small businesses find out how they can optimize their back offices a little bit better. So this is all in the space around digitization and automation in which the environment's moving towards. The next one is around globalization. The key thing here is that, as I said, the entities that are entering this complex environment are getting lower and lower in the continuum. So if you're a bank, this payer-payee model with something in the middle that helps with flows, helps with regulation, there's correspondent banking, this is something you do every day. But if you're a small supplier and you're trying to have payouts to your suppliers or in your distribution model or in your supply chain, this model of payer-payee is something that you're not familiar with. So if you're not familiar with it, then you're going to have to partner with entities that can help you with the compliance, right? You're going to want to have that straight-through processing to leverage that supply chain, but in order to do that, it's not quite as easy as business as normal, right? And so with this is where the CFO needs to be involved more, because the intricacies about how this actually transpires, how it affects the bottom line, how it affects cash management are all things that they need to have And then the other piece is around transparency and reporting, right? So these become requirements, whether they're audit requirements or they're for tax purposes. All of this stuff needs to work seamlessly. So if you take the idea of digitization and then you're globalizing it, these things have to work seamlessly, otherwise you're not going to meet the requirements. And again, if you're a large corporate entity, you have the ability to kind of have the infrastructure and have the teams to do that. But when you're smaller and you're truly taking advantage of the global network, how do you do that? You usually do that through partnerships. The next one is around faster payments. So faster payments has been something that has been long coming. The US is actually behind as far as being able to enable faster payments. And this would be something where there's multiple settlement cycles within a day, right? So traditionally, the settlement cycles have been at batch. They've been large mainframe systems. They've been highly efficient. They've been highly economical. They get to scale and they manage massive amounts of data, massive amounts of payments. But the idea now is that you're going to have the ability to have multiple settlement cycles. So whether that's through the ACH, whether that's through something like the clearinghouse or a service provider, they're building capability to allow corporates, even to allow individuals to have multiple settlement cycles. So when you think about that, that allows, speed. It allows different opportunities for cash flow management. It allows you to schedule things. It also allows for a new revenue model, because there are entities that now you have the capability to have faster payments. They may pay a different amount in order to receive that payment faster. So from an accounts payable perspective, there's negotiations and leverage that you can do with your suppliers because you have more flexibility. The infrastructure, sort of the railroad tracks for which payments flow, are changing, and that changes the business model. The other piece is that it also kind of dovetails to, I know you guys can't see the circle, but within there's 24/7 fraud detection. So as an example, back in the day when I used to do more product development, I brought a new initiative to our risk team. And although it passed all the risks, at the end of the session, I'll never forget, the risk manager said, "You didn't change the model, and you're not enabling sort of the crook to get into the bank, but you've enabled the getaway car to be faster." And so what we're seeing with faster payments is that the getaway car is continuing to get faster. And so with that, you have to have better monitoring, you have to have better analytics, because otherwise, the crooks can get in and they can get away with what they want a lot faster. There also is something around the credit push. This is a concept that is new to some operations within the ACH, obviously with payroll and the like. That's always been a push model. But within faster payments, there is the initiative that I am able to send you money, right? It's a buyer-initiated model. It's good funds from the start. So this is something also, it's not just that it can go faster, but instead of something being pulled from a sort of a debit model, it's something that you can initiate that payment and then do it at scale and then make that payment very rapid. So you're seeing that, again, service providers, some of the card networks are leveraging that already, but that concept of faster is not just timing, but it's also the functionality. So the next one is around fraud and risk management. And for this, we have some statistics here that are card-based, but it's relevant because this is, card not present is basically e-commerce. And what we've seen is that there's been a rise in fraud. This is total dollar amount in billions. And it is a number that cannot be ignored, basically, and it's meant to grow. So if you guys keep track of payments and fraud, the total percentage of fraud is going down, but the absolute dollar amount continues to grow. So as the space gets bigger, again, fraud is less, but the absolute dollar amounts are getting bigger. And some of this was anticipated in the US. We've all seen the implementation of EMV or the chip cards, right? So environments in which that's been deployed, typically there is a rise in card not present fraud. That's just kind of the model because the fraudsters go to the lowest hanging fruit, which is now e-commerce. But the idea around how this affects the CFO is that these numbers are big enough to where you have to recognize them. You have to deal with the systems and the operations to make sure that the payment information and what you're seeing that affects your financials are fully integrated, right? So this gets into threat, cyber intelligence, et cetera. You have to have fraud reporting, and there's a lot of players that are providing that fraud reporting and doing that at macroeconomic levels and real time. And so again, these are all pieces of the puzzle. As the pace of change happens and there's more payment volume, you have to take note of what the fraud is. And then the other part on the right-hand side is fraud as a percentage of revenue, right? So this has to do with breaches. Everyone wonders, what is the cost of a breach? It's really unknown at this point because it depends on the data that they steal. It depends on what you have to do to remediate that. But there is a statistic that said that fraud mitigation is $2.23 for every dollar of online fraud. So almost double it takes to mitigate after the fact in which you've had a breach. So it gets into this puzzle of how much are you spending to try to secure your environment. We sat down with a chief risk officer and she was asking, what have we seen in other clients? How do you address the board when they say, I don't want a breach? And the reality is that there isn't a good number to be able to tell them because it could be infinite, right? If the risk tolerance is 0, then you can basically spend anything in order to make that happen. And the reality is that most entities have already had some sort of breach in one way or another. The idea is, has something come out, has there been damages, et cetera. So it really is managing the risk versus trying to eliminate the security or the breach from ever happening. The other piece of this around fraud and risk management is this idea around what is the new normal and then how do you exceed in that new normal. And I won't go through each one of these, but the first one around compliance and regulation is something, again, that not everyone thinks about. The CFO traditionally does not necessarily think about compliance. That's something that's in the third line of defense. That's your internal audit group. That's an external auditor. What we're finding is that with the complexity and the pressures of globalization, digitization, faster, all these things are making such that you have to have on the back end robotics, simplification, your processes have to be better defined, you have to have better reporting, you have to manage these things in order to have the cost effectiveness as well as the efficiencies, and then if ever you do get audited, you have the data in order to substantiate what it is you're doing. So again, not traditionally something that a CFO would think about per se, but because of the speed and pace of change, these are things that all CFOs need to have in their purview and to have a conversation with their chief risk officer, their security officer, et cetera. The other one I'll talk about is the credit risk. So with the settlement windows shrinking, again, the demand and expectations from clients and suppliers to get paid faster and maybe even the opportunity to have more revenue because they're willing to pay for that. So this concept of a payments hub is coming back around. I've heard over the last 15 years that concept ebb and flow. And I do think if you read about it that the payments hub, as far as consolidating operations and managing your risk, is something that's coming back around. The only difference I can see from Payments Hub in the past, which were usually at banks, is that they're moving to something much smaller and much more nimble. So it's the same wording, but the application is a little bit different. So the last one we'll talk about is M&A. And again, this is not something new. The key thing around M&A is that it is continuing to be at the pace that it has in the past. We've not seen anything to show that the pace is going to change. And also we've not seen anything that says it's going to slow down. So with that, you're going to have continued operational change as you try to ingest the acquisitions. And what you're going to need to do from a CFO perspective is not just beyond the pure financial side as far as the due diligence, mapping through what your synergies are, figuring out how to integrate them, but you actually need to be able to anticipate that. You know that perhaps you're a part of a serial acquirer, and so you're anticipating who those entities are that you're going to acquire, and then how do you assimilate them into your back office and infrastructure as quickly as possible. So as that happens, you have to remember that some of these disruptive companies, they're now becoming acquisition targets, so you're actually trying to ingest something that doesn't fit into your model because they were a competitor or a disruptor of your own business. So being able to manage through that and adapt is something that's very important, has to be considered by the CFO. So as I wrap up here, there's a couple of things that I don't have slides for, but I did want to talk about. So one of the things is around if you have all of this complex change, and if you are driving towards efficiency, and you're ahead of the curve because you sort of know and have anticipated these 5 concepts, what do you do then if you are a CFO or a finance organization? And so part of the puzzle is not just eliminating the risk or eliminating the security threat or dealing with faster payments, is it allows you to do other things, right? So those other things are, more time for cash forecasting, determining the amount of idle cash during the day, so a treasury function, cash management function, managing FX in a hedging program, right? Optimize investments and debt level, make efficient debt repayment. So the idea is that it's twofold. The CFO is involved in order to manage through these change, and if they do that successfully, they're then able to shift focus to things that maybe were important, but were being distracted by the pace of change and the things that they were trying to do. So I think it's a two-sided puzzle. You have to make the efficiencies, and then you have to be more effective at the same time. And then the last thing I'll share is this sort of, put your money where your mouth is. And so you talk about these various changes, who's investing in them? What does that look like? So we have a tool at PWC, it's called De Novo, and it basically tracks pre-IPO companies and where investment dollars are going. So I did a little research today, and if we look at the 5 topics and we talk about digitization, we currently track 325 companies that are focused on digitization of cash, treasury management functions, and commercial payments, and they've raised collectively $2.8 billion in the last 7 years. So again, a very hot space. This is something where the market has said, I'm willing to invest in that. It is a disruptive or fintech space, and then you see where the dollars are. Another one around increasing use of digital solutions that they can integrate and improve operations. 702 companies, $6.7 billion invested since 2010. On the globalization theme, we track 189 companies that are focused on the proliferation of cross-border transfer platforms. They've raised $1.6 billion since 2010. So there may be some overlap between these companies because you could be someone that's focused on cross-border but also is digitizing and then has a treasury management solution. But the idea is that there are hundreds of companies focused on this space, and there are billions of dollars being invested to make this work better. So in conclusion, just want to be able to say that the CFO and CEO and COO are increasingly having to coordinate and collaborate on things that are growing their business, like M&A, that are being dealt with as far as globalization and faster payments. And we see that this trend is going to happen. It's going to continue, and that only the organizations that are able to adapt and really embrace those changes are going to be those that are successful. So thank you very much for your time, and I think there's some questions.
Thank you, Nathan. We have time for one question before the next session. So, any questions in the audience?
Are the Warriors winning? No. Anyway.
Of course they are.
Whereas crypto or blockchain is one of the major 5 shifts, or maybe the 6th shift that you didn't reference.
Yeah, I thought about that as I put this through. It's out there. in the world of financial services and payments, the way we're describing it is sort of it's a problem looking for a business case and a solution. Obviously in cryptocurrency it's sort of found its foothold, but beyond that there's been a lot of experimentation. It's not something where they found a sustainable use for the blockchain, but there are lots and lots of people out there. The reason why I didn't add it on here is because the 5 are already happening, whereas blockchain is still kind of out there. It's similar, I thought about adding in the API interface. In financial services, it's sort of there, it's not completely, but in the world of technology, APIs are sort of a done deal. So I didn't put them in, just the difference between future versus now, that's all. Awesome, thank you very much.
Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you.